Hello and welcome to the Majlis, the podcast by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, focusing on Central Asia. I am Mohammed Tahir, your host here in Washington, D.C. In recent years, Central Asian fighters of ISIS have been making headlines around the world. A lot has been written about them, their role in ISIS, especially after the Times Square, Stockholm, St. Petersburg, and Istanbul attacks. Every such attack would also lead to a new round of speculations as to their size and scope within the ISIS, ways in which they were lured into their camp, and more importantly, what all this might mean to the region's future as ISIS crumbles in the Middle East. Now, thanks to the findings of new research project called Not in Our Name, run by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, we have answered to some of these questions. And today we are here to discuss the project, the research and its findings as relates to all these questions. To do so, I'm joined by Asel Murzakulova, the deputy editor of the project, also senior researcher at the University of Central Asia in Bishkek. Serek Baysambayev, the lead project moderator, also a doctoral student researching violent extremism at the Eurasian National University in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog, Kishlok OOZ in Prague. Welcome on board, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Thank you. Very nice to have you. First of all, Asel, tell us please about this project. What is this and how did you do it?
Our project was very impressive, I will say. It's the first project focused on the three countries, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan. Our main focus was, first of all, start honest conversation about consequences for local communities, and also try to highlight the causes which can affect radicalization of youth in particular places. Our project consists from 10 programs. It is focus group discussions, which was held in 2 locations in each country. It is rural area or periphery of country and the center. And also we had a final discussion, which we had in each country, and I will say regional final session, which was held in Bishkek. Finally, our project engaged more than 100 participants from 3 of these countries. And now the result of this project can be viewed through current time and also Facebook pages. And we also can see the wide discussion which already occurred. You know, in our region exists some perceptions that these subjects only, I will say, government or theologists or some expert can talk about this subject. And we actually broke this perception and show how ordinary people can also contribute to this discussion and see some very important ways how to talk about this.
Yeah, so the project director, Noah Tucker, could not join us today as he's in the air somewhere between Asia and Europe as we speak now. So, Serek, you are the project moderator and also focus especially on the Kazakhstan part of this. So what does this project cover and what does this not cover?
In my opinion, this project gives us possibility to present what ordinary people, particularly youth, think about the radicalization and about the movement of our citizens to Syria and Iraq. And this is very important in terms of providing alternative information about this topic in general. As a research fellow, I see that in case of Kazakhstan, there is a lack of information about the families, relatives of jihadists. And thanks to this project, we showed what kind of causes or what kind of negative consequences we have in the local communities. We included mostly youth participants, but we couldn't invite representatives of all generation. So it was not an objective of this project, and the project was mostly about engaging youth in conversation. But I think that it would be maybe the next objective to engage, to involve all generation in conversation, because there is a still gap between elders and the youngsters. what we figured out in the course of discussions, a lot of families don't talk about what is violent extremism in case of Kazakhstan, and there is no language of speaking what is this and how to prevent of radicalization of our citizens. And I think that we should do this.
Yeah, I see that this is filling an important gap there. So additionally, those who are not yet familiar with the project are also invited to visit Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's press page, where we have created a special section about the project where you can find basic information about it and also watch documentaries that Asel was referring to earlier. So coming back to the discussion, so where is the "not" in our name? Where this name is coming from? Asel?
Actually, we refer to this huge generalization where we see these strong discourses of Islamophobia, which means that all Muslims are somehow like potentially threat. And we give through this project possibility to present their own view to the problem and raise their own voice to ordinary people from Central Asia region, which unfortunately from the last 2-3 years became more and more recognized with this problem. So, and we give opportunity to families who was affected by this tragedy speak to wide audience. And through these real stories of mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters who lost their relatives in this war, we try to build this empathy to these families, to concrete people, because when we talking about this problem, sometimes it looks like it's not my problem. It's some way not directly affect me. But through this project, we try to build this empathy that it doesn't matter religious person or not. Do you have any problems with religiosity or not? It doesn't matter. This problem can affect everybody, everywhere. Even you live in a big city or in a village. So, and also what we found through this project, we made our focus groups in specific locations. For Pakistan, it was Aravan, a village in the south, and for Kazakhstan, it was Jeskazgan, and for Tajikistan, it was Kulok. So we find these specific locations do a huge flow specifically from these locations. So based on official data, for example, for Kyrgyzstan, more than 80% who left to Syria was from south, and third part of them was from Aravan. So with Aravani people about this problem. And we found that our participants had friends, relatives, they know this problem very deep actually. And we give to them opportunity to talk about this. And then through this wide media coverage, we try to build this empathy that people from Narin, from Isiku, from even Bishkek can see these problems and engage with. We also find very interesting findings from Jeskazgan, for example, in Syria. I'm sure can talk about this more.
Yeah, we will get to this, Asal, in a little bit. And Bruce, the opportunity to discuss these issues seems to be the highlight of what we heard so far. Obviously, the project involves lots of other things, lots of other dimensions. So what is the importance of the topic that this project, our colleagues have researched about and relates to today's issues in Central Asia? What's the gap that it's filling?
Well, I think for once we get to hear the voice of for lack of a better term, the average person, and what they think about this. I mean, these are people that, in the cases of the hot zones that they picked, they've been affected, some more directly than others, but they also brought together, for the project, people that were from the cities who really weren't so affected by it, and they got to hear about this. Now, we know that the governments in every one of these countries can try to control the narrative of what is radicalism, what is recruitment, why does this happen, and they have done some programs, on national TV that, of course, suit the government's interest, and I don't have so much of a problem with that because they're portraying these, the conflict and the groups that are involved, as evil groups and misguided, and I really don't have so much of a problem with the fact that they're trying to make this look bad because it is a bad situation. But, then all people get to see on TV or read in the newspaper is, the government version of what's happening. And maybe someone's come back and they've managed to detain them immediately and they put them up as an example of how badly things can go. But, generally people in a lot of these countries have a little bit of apprehension when they watch things on television, especially state media, because they're not sure that they're getting the whole truth from the government. So by going out and finding the people, who really were connected with this in some way or another through family relations, friends, people who knew somebody who actually went, and again, people from the cities who weren't so directly connected to it, and letting them speak about it openly. I think it's much more powerful than trying to get your information about what's happening from any media outlet, really, but certainly from state media in particular. So I would hope, and I watched some of these, and it is powerful to watch how the people describe it. I mean, you get the sense that this is real and raw emotion and candid testimony from these people, and it's the kind of thing that, like I said, I don't think people would be able to get from reading or watching programs about this in their own countries.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. So speaking of extremism in Central Asia, there are so many questions and so many misconceptions about it. So we have only 40 minutes to discuss all this. We need to be a little bit quick. So, Cedric, tell us 3 main findings which you learned during the research that you didn't know before about this topic.
I'm focusing particularly on how the criminal culture can be one of their social roots of radicalization. In case of Kazakhstan, we faced in 2011, 2012 with a series of violent acts, and a lot of violent acts was conducted by gang groups under the name of Islam. So this was the reason why I started to look at why there is a very strong connection between gangs, between petty criminals and jihadists. So this is one very big topic. I can talk about this a lot. But if to look in general, violent extremism in Kazakhstan, we found out that mostly radicalization happens inside the country. If to compare with other countries, so the economic migration is where it matters. For example, for Kyrgyzstan, for Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. But in Kazakhstan, jihadists, they were from the country, from country. And this is one of the main specific radicalization. So another thing that there is a very huge impact of official propaganda on how people perceive this issue. As a sociologist, I know that our narrative, as Bruce mentioned, are controlled by government, and they create the picture of what is radicalization and why it happens. And mostly they too much focus on religious roots of radicalization. Dominating or prevailing narrative is that radicalization or violent extremism is a negative consequence of Islamization of country or society. I not agree with this because radicalization happens mostly because of social problems, and this is not only a religious issue. And another thing what I can mention that people very hungry on talking about the issue about how the radicalization affect to their families, communities, and they don't have a space for that. So again, media too much controlled by officials, and social media unfortunately don't have opportunity or don't give opportunity to make open and broad conversation, and there is no platforms where people can take a conversation in an open manner. So I think this is a very important finding of my research and the project Not in Our Name. And these problems, I think our governments and experts in this area should focus on resolving and to give opportunity for networks, for communities, to build strategies how to counter violent extremism.
Thank you, Cedric. So the same question to you, Asal. So what are the 3 main findings that you got to know that you didn't know before this research project?
First major finding, I was very impressed by the discussion which occurred between our female participants. They raised such concrete questions, and it wasn't only doing our project. I mean, this occur in these communities. I mean, the question what a woman can do if her relatives affected by extremists, where she can go, to whom she can talk. And we find that they never will go to police and never go to any NGO organizations. And if we will see how different organizations, even states, try to build this counter-terroristic programming, we see that the main actors in this program is the two these institutions there. It is police and NGO organizations. And we can say that it is not relevant approach. The second findings for me, it was a huge stigmatization of the families. I mean, the families who was affected by this extremism, I mean, members of them was left. Now in communities, they very stigmatized. So I think our project was also somehow to them raise their voice and say that they in very depressive situation, nobody tried to help them, even just talk with them. Everybody thinks that if, for example, my neighbors had a family member who left to Syria, that means they are not trustful family. But from their situation, we can see that parents never, I mean, they was in total frustration when their sons and daughters left to the war. And this stigmatization occur in all three countries. I mean, it's I'm talking about this community level stigmatization of these families.
Yeah,
I think we need to work with these families, actually. They can be in avant-garde of this counter-terrorism programming, actually. And also, I was very surprised how our participants blamed parents for their not proper education or something like that. That's why their sons and daughter left to Syria. For me, it was the big surprise that such way of thinking. And we actually challenged this when we found that it is somehow a common narrative in our focus group discussions. We came to solutions that we will invite parents who lost their child on this war. And we invite a mother from Aravan to talk with our focus group participants. And this final session will come soon. You can see the website. It was very deep and impressive session.
Thank you very much, Asel. Bruce, you were not part of this particular research team, but you did lots of your own research on this topic. You have seen the film, Not in Our Name. You also did a story on this project a couple of days ago. So the same question to you, but slightly from a different angle. So what are the three things you learned from this project, from the findings of this project that you didn't know before?
Wow, three things. That would be tough. I mean, like you said, we've done some of the research on this before. You know what? The thing I think is kind of adding on to a little bit what Asel said is it's interesting that families in some cases, of course, people picked up and left for Syria, and I mean it was very, very sudden. But in other cases, there were signs. We heard family members say they were in Russia or something, and you could tell on their phone calls they weren't the same, and they came home and there was things that they didn't want us watching TV or talking to certain people or something like that. I think that's why one of the things this series is so important, because a lot of relatives, if it's your brother, your son, something like that, you don't want to believe they're doing something wrong. And the answer that most of these people gave is, well, we just thought that they were more religious. But there were signs that things were changing, and people always wanted to believe the best. And of course, we always want that for people close to us. We don't want to think that they're involved in something bad. But since this stuff is not aired very publicly, people just they wanted to assume that everything was okay, and that their relative or friend had just changed a little bit because they'd become more religious, and they didn't want to go any further and think that maybe it was more than that, and maybe they did have some other problems. They were willing to accept the fact fact they were just more religious and there was no need to really talk about it any more than that. When in fact, maybe sitting down and trying to confront them with some of this stuff and saying, where are you going with this might have actually been a better tactic in the end. But again, no one had ever seen programs like Not in Our Name before. So why would they have believed anything, I suppose, was amiss when they just figured they could answered their questions by just believing that these people had just become more religious somehow.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. So these are all very good points. Also, we yet to discuss a couple of other points, especially a comparative analysis between the regions as to the impact of this phenomenon in ways in which people decided to leave and ways in which this can be prevented going forward. So we will continue the discussion talking about these and many other questions very shortly. First, let me recap the debate that today on the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia podcast. I'm joined by Asal Murzakulova, Deputy Editor of the project, also a Senior Researcher at the University of Central Asia, Serik Baysimbayev, the Lead Project Moderator, also Doctoral Student researching violent extremism at the Euro-Asian National University in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and Bruce Pannier, Editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia blog, Kishlok Ovozi in Prague. I'm Mohammed Tahir, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Media Manager in Washington, D.C., and we are discussing the findings of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia Counter-Extremism Project called Not in Our Name. To start with your point, Asal, when I asked the question about three findings, two was kind of particularly interesting to me: stigmatization of the families and also active participation of female panelists. Expand that, why you think it's important.
Personally, for me, it was somehow the gap. When we're talking about the problem, every time we talking about only, I will say, hard part of the problem. Right? And you never see this community part, what happened on the ground. And on the ground, it's a huge discussion how we can resist, what we can do, and also to whom we can refer. And now, for example, particularly for our session in Kyrgyzstan, we see that now our participant rate that before Syria, this digital imams was very popular. And it was a huge discussion into the community to which imam is more authority. And now they understood that this somehow can affect to this path, these digital imams. And now they try to check this knowledge which they received from different sources. Also, in ground level, we see somehow the mobilization, I will say, that women understood that if they just will follow existing rules, they can be affected. Or we find a lot of families who lost their daughters just because their husbands go to Syria, and these women they haven't any idea where they go, what is Syria, etc. And now we see that these huge numbers of our citizens of Kyrgyzstan, they not all, fighters. They are women and children, and who will raise their voice, who will protect their rights? Because nobody wanna to do something with this problem.
Yeah. Serik, on your point, you said it's not only religion that drives people to extremism or Syria. Explain what you mean.
I mean that radicalization is a very complex issue which rooted from different kind of social, economic, psychological problems. And it's not good or to pay too much attention on a religious aspect of radicalization. Why? Because choosing or religious belief, it's a very sensitive thing. And people can choose some specific beliefs which sometimes might be not accepted by majority. And if we consider religion as a problem, it could be a soil or reason of religious discrimination or discrimination of religious minorities. it's better to look at the radicalization as a social process when individuals isolated from society or have grievances because of their lack of educational opportunities, job opportunities, and or have some specific background which makes him more aggressive or ready for violence. And I think this approach will help to build more relevant counter-extremism programs and to look at the problem in a broader context. And for example, I recommend to our officials to launch special program of decriminalization of youth environment. As I mentioned before, a lot of youth who get used to use violence as a tool for solving their problems, they more vulnerable in terms of radicalization. And as we saw from our cases in Kazakhstan, it's easier to get into radical ideology for youth who practiced petty criminal activities. So our government, our counter-extremism program should include this finding and to launch special activities and to involve psychologists or social workers to work with this at-risk group. And that's why I think that we shouldn't focus only on religious roots.
Bruce, do you like to add anything in terms of the underlying causes that Sirik was talking about?
Yeah, well, I agree 100%, especially with the part about it's not just religion, and that there are a lot of sociological factors that are involved in this. During the series, they made a point of showing that, migrant laborers, for instance, were one target for some of these recruiting groups. And I've been to a couple of Noah's talks when he's been going over his findings of what he'd found prior to this project. And it showed he'd followed people on Facebook, and they had, when they left Central Asia, got into Russia, and a lot of them were just lonely and looking for friends, and so they went onto the internet and they were on Facebook and different social networks, and they were trying to meet someone new. And those are exactly the kind of people these recruiters are looking for, is someone who's out there alone, separated from their family, separated from their community. Maybe they found some of their own ethnic group or people from Central Asia in Russia, but they don't seem to have fit in very well. And so they're kind of vulnerable at that point, and they're targeted. And that's where a lot of success comes for these recruiters, is they get them. I remember Noah showing one guy that was trying to meet girls. He came from Uzbekistan. He was on Facebook to see if he couldn't meet up. Obviously, he was, alone, young guy, looking to see if he couldn't meet girls on Facebook. And he was just continuously having no luck with that. And eventually he hit on somebody that recommended watching one of these religious sites, an ISIS site, and they managed to slowly work their way into his psyche and convince him that it was time to go to Syria. So that's another thing to consider too, is they're certainly vulnerable once they're outside the country and away from their family and friends and the values that they grew up with, and then in a totally different reality in a foreign country.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I wish we would have more time to discuss all these, but unfortunately we need to wrap up the discussion very soon. But a couple of final points. Now, according to various estimates, over 4,000 people have joined ISIS from Central Asia. To expand some of the underlying causes, why they did what they did, let's draw some comparison, Asal. So looking into the map as part of your research, the team has visited 16 regions in Central Asia, and a couple of them were in Kyrgyzstan. So paint a picture for those countries for us with an eye on possible reasons. What are some of the circumstantial similarities and differences between those regions which might explain why people went to Syria?
In general, I will say the common for all three countries where we had our project is a huge discussion about social justice. It can articulate it by different ways, but it was a strong message from our focus groups that, for example, when we consider some cases when rich families left to Syria, because it's also a common narrative that only poor, unemployed, and not educated people or Gulf Syria. Actually, we also show the cases where it's not true, actually. And for all these cases, even it is Tajikistan or Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, I found the common link. It is they live in a system which not give to them social justice. I mean, maybe in a broad term, it is consequences of this collapse of USSR when government has a strong role in and give some kind of social net to societies. And of course, now we have different situations along with this. We have administrative policies in Tajikistan and Kazakhstan, and we have relatively free situation in Kyrgyzstan. But even these different landscapes, we have a similar problem. So I think, as I highlighted, this social justice issue, that current distribution of power and goods, not all social groups feel okay with this situation.
Thank you very much, Asal. So common narrative is lack of social justice from Asal's point. So in Kazakhstan, I see the research team has gone to a couple of regions, and 4 of them are in the middle of the country. Serik, what was special about this region?
We organized a discussion in Jizkazgan.
Yeah.
Jizkazgan, it is a mining town in the center of Kazakhstan, which located very far from center. And this very depressive and decreasing in terms of social economic situation city, where people try to move to big city, and because there is a very hard in terms of job opportunity, education, and so on. And Jizkazgan became famous after the Syria war. As officials said, most of Kazakhstans, they traveled from this region. And it was this, so now this city, this region is considered as a hot zone of radicalization. So there is a question why it happened in Jizkazgan, in this city. Unfortunately, we don't have one explanation, or there is several concepts, several approaches. So I think that there is a complex of factors we see. This is, in one hand, the whole social environment, which get people into very bad moods, we can say that. And people don't feel a perspective in the future. They frustrated because of a social economic situation. And this is a very good or fertile soil for difficult radical ideologies. And I think that radical propaganda of radical ideology in some cases targeted these kind of places in Kazakhstan, and we see the result now.
Thank you, sir. So, Bruce, in Kazakhstan, Jizkazgan, in Kyrgyzstan, Aravan was the focal point of this research. Then when you expand this to Tajikistan, you see on the map of the researchers, Kurgantepe, Kulob, Mekhnat Abad. These are all I believe, in southern Tajikistan, are located very close to each other. So what are you thinking about this? Does these comparison rings any bell? Does anything strikes out here?
Well, one definitely compliments to the team for finding these hot zones. It kind of shows that there's areas in the country which, for different reasons, seem to generate discussion of these kind of groups and what joining it could be for an individual. Obviously, these people had been affected in some way in their native region. And it seems, as the project showed, that it wasn't a coincidence that people went from that region. So what was the message that was making its way out among some of the young people about not only dissatisfaction with local conditions, but also with potential opportunities by leaving the country and joining a group like this? I think it did do a good job of showing, in that respect, that there were areas where this stuff could find root among a segment of the population, and that they would actually act and go outside and go and join these groups in Syria. So, that was, I think that's the big takeaway for me anyway from this, was that, because it's not all over any of these countries, but there seem to be areas that and again, the reasons were different.
Thank you, Bruce. So today we are not talking about Uzbekistan in Turkmenistan. It is not because that these problems does not exist there, but perhaps it's worse, maybe. In fact, IMU, Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, which was founded in Uzbekistan, currently carries ISIS's flag in Afghanistan. So the reason why we are not talking about these two countries is because the research team wasn't allowed to come in investigate in those two countries. So I just wanted to clarify that point. So coming back to the topic, now these are the reasons, but regardless of the cause and reason, Central Asia has to face with the aftermath of this development. How authorities are dealing with this in the countries you have researched? Let's start with Kyrgyzstan, Asel.
Mostly authorities in Kyrgyzstan use a common approach. They try to deal with this through give more power to civil forces like police, etc. But in another hand, we see that, for example, a state agency of religious affairs, they try to somehow refresh normative, the new refresh code, new laws, and give new articles which will give more explanation what does it mean be extremist. This concept of extremism very complicated in our countries. For example, you can be jailed if you will have some brochure which will be identified by government as a radical narratives. But who gives this conclusion? It's a huge problem. This conclusion given by some experts, but what their background, from which perspective they give such conclusions, etc. And you can see in our film, which also will be soon in a website, that actually now I'm referring to Civic. Actually, the number of people who was convicted for specifically this, I will say crime, that increased. But I think it's not a solution. If you will reason more and more people, you need to refresh how you identify the problem and work in a communities level.
Great. Serik, the same question to you. How the Kazakh authorities are dealing with this situation? How similar or different is this, what Asel has just described?
The main difference is that Kazakhstan is a highly centralized and country with a strong bureaucracy, and the countering with violent extremism. The approach is looks like top down. The concept of these activities created and launched in the center and goes lower to the local administration. In terms of main idea or main approach which our officials use, as I mentioned before, too much focus on religious side of radicalization, and as a tool using officials and the outreach activities. The main goal is increasing religious literacy of population. So it means that it looks a lot of lectures with youngsters where imams talk about what is traditional Islam, how to be good Muslim, what is our cultural backgrounds which can us prevent. So it's a very boring and I think not effective tool of preventing radicalization, because it's too general, it's too complicated for use, and it should be we need more nuanced and more specific materials. And another thing, as Asel said, there is a trend when people are arrested because of their beliefs, not for expressing radical views or planning radical acts, only for their, for example, commentary about religion or about their belief, they can be arrested. And we also see that the number of people who accused in prisons for their beliefs is growing. If I remember, it's about 200 people this year arrested only for propaganda of terrorism. But propaganda of terrorism, this article is very blurred. It's very hard to define what does it mean. For example, one guy, he was arrested for comment. He wrote, "We shouldn't celebrate New Year. This is not our celebration. It's not in our religion, in our culture." So he was arrested for this comment, and this is, I think, insane. It's not good. It's a counterproductive approach.
Yeah. Tajikistan appears to be, applying perhaps entirely a different strategy. Bruce, do you want to comment just in a couple of words on what they are doing about this?
Well, Tajikistan's tried a lot of things. Obviously, they don't want anyone to go, and they have their own version of propaganda that they spread about this thing. The one thing I'll give the Tajik authorities credit for is that they have made public effort to bring people home and said, and told through various channels, anyone that did go over there, that if you are willing to come back and confess that that's what you did, tell us in advance that you made this mistake, you went, come back, and all will be forgiven. I don't know if all will be forgiven exactly, but in the meantime, they don't take them and jail them right away. I mean, I'm sure they're watching them, and they do use them on television for propaganda purposes, but at least they have made an offer. And the embassies in Turkey, especially the Tajik embassy in Turkey, has been instrumental in bringing a lot of people home and trying to help get that message out to anyone who did cross into Syria that you can be forgiven and you can come back. But you have to admit that you did something wrong and let us know, and we'll try to get you back and integrate you into society. I don't know to what degree they've been able to do that, but at least they've kind of laid that one out there. So that would be something different that I haven't really seen from the other Central Asian governments, or at least it's more pronounced from the Tajik government than from any of the other Central Asian governments.
So today ISIS is crumbling, but as long as underlying causes remain, this won't be end of the story. But we are reaching towards end of our story today, finally. So what is one point you want us to take away from this project, from your findings, Sirik? Just one point, quickly and briefly.
I think that this project should be shared as much as possible because there is a very big gap in terms of understanding what happens, what people think, what people can do to prevent in their local communities. And as I mentioned, as I said to my colleagues, even my relatives, they didn't know about these kind of stories when people from Kazakhstan, from Rizkazgan, went abroad to join the military terroristic groups. So it shows that people need information, people want to know more and discuss this. And I think that this project will be very helpful in this sense.
Okay. And Asel, the same question to you, and then Bruce.
I will say that we need to create more regional comparative content. It is also same like in academical sphere. It is very few research in comparative way. So I think we need to move on this direction, this regional comparative approach.
Bruce, final point from you on takeaways, what we should take away from this entire project, research, finding, and this discussion.
I'm going to echo kind of what Sarek said, that everyone should watch this. I mean, these are real voices of people who've been affected by this, and voices of people trying to explain what they know about this kind of problem. It's not the scripted texts that the governments give, and it's not the people that the governments handpick to come out and denounce what's going on in the region. This is, legitimate and open testimony about what's going on out there and how it's affected people back in Central Asia. And like I said, I don't think I can do any more than highly recommend everyone watch it to get an idea of just why this happens and what the results are when it does happen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia blog, Kishlok Owazi. Also, big thanks goes to Asel Murzakulova, deputy editor of the project called Not in Our Name, and Sirik Baysambayev, the lead project moderator, also researching violent extremism at the Eurasian National University in Kazakhstan. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your time and thoughts today.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you. And this is from me, Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia podcast. Until next week. Bye-bye.